Okay.
So first of all, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
Wow.
I think you're working on a new album now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How can you give us a brief explanation? How can we imagine the process of a creation of an album?
You know, making albums is unique to every particular setting. In our particular case, there's usually, it goes through several phases. There's the initial burst of ideas, then there's sort of organizing those ideas, then there's kind of a down period, and then we oftentimes go back and listen to a lot of other riffs and ideas and revisit lyrics and different things, because sometimes a piece of music or a lyric idea is created sometimes even years ago, and it just for whatever reason wasn't the right fit on that particular album. But all of a sudden, several years later, it's like, oh man, that's perfect. Or it hits your ear in a certain way, and you go, oh man, we should use that. So we'll pick that little piece out. You know, Megadeth material is a lot of riffs and small ideas put together as a composition, as opposed to just sort of a 3-chord progression with a melody over top of it. You know, I mean, we've had some songs that have been that simple, but usually they're kind of a more complex arrangement. So. There's kind of these 2 or 3 phases of writing, then oftentimes making demos, which is sort of the pre-production, because once you go into the studio and start recording, usually a producer's hired, there's people being paid, and you know, as they say, time is money in the studio. So I think for us, we like to be as prepared as possible when we go in the studio, so that we walk in. I think our best records have been, we've walked in as prepared as we can possibly be, rather than trying to sit down and write and figure things out on the fly. I think that we've been our most productive and made our best work when we've been really prepared going in the studio first.
Mm-hmm. Do you sort out the producer for yourself?
You know, for us, the choosing of a producer, we've had lots of times people come to us and say, hey, here's like, for instance, Rust in Peace. Mike Klink was available to do it. We were very excited, due in large part, of course, because of his recent success he just had with Guns N' Roses. But for me and Dave and Marty Friedman, a lot of it was because we liked his work. He engineered under producer Ron Nevison on some UFO records, in particular the live album Strangers in the Night. So for us, being UFO and Michael Schenker fans, that for us was cool. And then there have been other times when the record company has suggested various producers. Max Norman is someone who we had a real good several records that we did with him. I think Cryptic Writings with Dan Huff was a really good synergy. Andy Sneap did some records recently with the band, and I think he had a good mindset for riff guitar, you know, metal, and I think did a good job just kind of helping focus a lot of things with Dave with Megadeth that I think has put the band back in a good light again.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I think you're one of the 2 band members who founded the band.
Mm-hmm.
I think you guys experienced a lot of lineup changes throughout your career in the Megadeth. Is it a thing which can be avoided when you start a new band?
You know, as far as lineup changes go with bands, and certainly within Megadeth, you know, our initial lineup with Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland, it was a very odd collision. It was kind of, in fact, Dave and I were just talking about it today. It was kind of the big bang of thrash metal, because out of it was this huge collision of particles that created something very explosive and very interesting, you know, out of, say, the big 4, if you will. We definitely had a very unique sound because Dave and I were the rock metal guys. That's what we grew up on. And then Gar and Chris were very much jazz, fusion, and even 60s freeform jam type of music. You know, like Gar Samuelson always referenced his influences as Billy Cobham meets Keith Moon. And same with Chris Poland. You know, he was a big fan of like John McLaughlin and Mahavishnu Orchestra meets Jimi Hendrix, so just these radical, bizarre combinations. And then you take that and you mix that with me and Dave, which was very much rock, metal, and rock and roll kind of history to our playing. And it really created something unique. But I think, like a lot of things in the chemistry lab, a lot of good ideas can be so explosive that they just sort of blow themselves apart, and that's what happened. And our next record, we basically replaced them, and it wasn't until we did Rust in Peace when Nick Menz and Marty Friedman came in. Essentially, looking back on it, I think what Dave and I did is we didn't just replace members, we essentially almost reformed the band. And that by doing that, I think gave us many more years together with that lineup. And of course, then there were, again, it's hard to keep, you look at any business, businesses don't keep the same people together. In fact, it's hard for even partners who start a business to stay together. In fact, the fact that Dave and I have been together for so many years is remarkable, because people change. You grow up, you have new experiences, you have personal life experiences that take you in different directions, and to stay, focused on one thing is very difficult, and especially when you're dealing with something as just kind of always ebbing and flowing and moving, like creativity. The creativity we feel today may not be the same as what it was yesterday. So that's the idea of it, and that's what's so exciting about it.
Yep. Given it twice, is it better for a starting band to have some band members who are close friends, or band members who share the same vision?
Bands form for all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes it's a bunch of buddies. It's kind of like a gang. I've tried to do that over the years when I was growing up, and by nature, one guy falls in love with a girl and they go off and do something, or another guy, for whatever reason, his financial or family situation doesn't allow him to pursue that. And then there's other situations like what we have in Megadeth, where Dave and I met really purely for the focus of the band, and everything else developed out of that. And I think here in the last year or so, we had an opportunity to, with a little time away from each other off the campus, to come back together again and get that component of friendship and brotherhood first, because we already knew how to run the band. We already knew how to do that. We knew how to write songs, make records, tour, and do all the rest of that. And I think for us, to come back together at this point in time and to be able to really have a true friendship and brotherhood that supersedes even the band was really, it's really been a blessing, quite honestly, because oftentimes in pursuit of the goal, personal relations can get very strained. And ultimately, when personal relations get strained, the goal of being a band falls apart. So it's kind of this chicken or the egg, or putting the cart before the horse, and all these kind of things that things are always jockeying for position in a band, and again, you're dealing with something very fragile, which is creativity, which is always from the heart, not from the head. You know what I mean? And that's, there's a saying, the longest journey is the 12 inches from the head down to the heart, like right there. And that's the hardest thing, to try to keep some equilibrium inside of bands, especially in rock and roll bands.
That's cool. Do you guys have a management, or do you manage yourself?
Megadeth has management, and always has had management. In the early days, essentially, Dave and I did a lot of the grunt work together. Dave had the kind of big picture vision, and he and I worked together on a lot of the day-to-day stuff, everything from fan club to calling record companies, talking with various people, booking shows, a lot of those things. A lot of those things were connections that Dave had early on, and a lot of interest from his days when he was in Metallica. And that was a strength that we had, that we built Megadeth on, and I think that's important for all musicians and bands, is you have to build upon your strength. And the music business is very much an industry about being connected, and it's about who you know, and being connected to the people that you can create partnerships and relationships with that are beneficial to both sides, not just one way, but for both sides. And really, they're called managers, and to some degree they manage, but a large part of it is they're basically people who mine for opportunity for their artist. That's really what they do. And the best managers that I've seen are the ones who obviously will fight hard for their client, their artist, the band, but also are well connected and can bring great opportunity to the band, whether touring opportunities, recording. I mean, in this day and age, there's other things besides just making an album and a tour. There's things like video games, soundtracks, merchandising, TV shows. There's a lot of other things that come along with that. So, good management who can work with a booking agent, who can work with the business management to help manage the financial affairs. It really, those people all have to really be working together. There has to be a good synergy between them, I think. And when that all works, things really kind of move along really smoothly for us out here on the road. And while we're, allows us to just put our creative cap on and just be in that creative mode rather than to have to always be concerned about all of the business stuff.
Cool. Yep. I think how hard is it now for management to manage you as a band?
I think the longer you've been around as an artist, management becomes kind of a double-edged sword because on one hand you are experienced and you know what works, and I often say sometimes you don't always know what works, but you definitely learn what doesn't work. That's one thing that experience gives you, is what doesn't work. And oftentimes I think when putting your team together of managers, agents, your legal counsel, and that it's really just kind of finding people that are on the same page with you, and that doesn't mean you always have to agree on everything, because Dave and I have always had a saying that if two people agree on everything, then one of us is unnecessary, right? Because you don't just need two people who always say, oh yeah, sometimes having some controversy, or at least objectivity is really probably the better word to say, well, that's good, but how about if we look at it from this side? That it just offers, I think, to me, that's what real partnership is, is being able to have, to be in agreement, but also to agree to disagree, and for everybody to be open to go, okay, I think my idea is good and I think it's the right way, but I'm also open to seeing if maybe there's someone on our team who can help improve this and even take it up to a bigger level. And I think that's how teamwork works, is so that everybody can try to improve everything. So management becomes one of those critical tools, but is also something that a manager and artist really have to be. He's kind of the fifth Beatle, if you will. He's kind of the silent band member of sorts.
Cool. So another topic, what about the charts? Are they relevant for a band like Megadeth? Do you watch the charts placements when you release an album?
The charts can be they matter because they are a benchmark that the business gauges you by. Not so much the public, So I mean, there's certain types of charts. There's even certain types of awards. Some awards are to honor, say, hey, look, you sold this much, as a result, here's a benchmark, and you're awarded something, and that goes noticed by people in your profession and in your industry. I think at the end of the day, the fans don't really care. I think I think that's the trick, is sometimes for artists to be proud of their accolades and their accomplishments, but not to tout that out so much, because at the end of the day, I know growing up as a rock and roll fan, I usually got turned on to bands before most of my friends did. And as a result, I didn't care that they sold a lot. In fact, sometimes I liked them better when they didn't sell as much. I liked them when they were kind of my own personal little, my own personal pet artist that I really liked, my own favorite band, But they are important because they do. It's kind of a testimony to your genre, to your organization's accomplishments that we were able to achieve this, But at the end of the day, once you achieve that on a record and you do a tour, there's a saying that you're only as good as your last gig. So when you go in to make a new album, you've kind of turned the page and it's a blank canvas and you have to start all over. And what you accomplished in the past really doesn't matter as you move forward with your next album.
Cool.
All right?
Thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful timing.
Perfect. And it's getting hot in here.
Yeah.
All right, good?
Thank